My name is Eleanor Grayson, and at 75, I thought I knew the shape of betrayal. I'd lived through decades of small slights, whispered judgments, and the slow erosion of love that comes with time. But nothing prepared me for the day my family turned their backs on me, leaving me to rot in a house that had once been a home. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air smells of damp leaves and regret. When my daughter, Clara, and her husband, Thomas, came to me with their plan. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd bandaged Clara's scraped knees and braided her hair for school dances. Their faces were tight, their words rehearsed. They said I was too old to live alone, that the house was too big, too expensive to maintain. They said they'd found a place for me, a nursing home on the edge of town, a sterile box where old women go to fade. I looked into Clara's eyes, searching for the little girl who used to cling to me. But all I saw was a stranger calculating costs. Thomas wouldn't meet my gaze. He stared at the table, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. They'd already packed my bags. They said it was for my own good. I begged them to reconsider. My voice cracked as I spoke of the memories woven into these walls, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet nights when my late husband, Henry, and I would sit by the fire, dreaming of our future. This house was all I had left of him, of us. But Clara's lips thinned, and she said they couldn't afford to keep me here. They needed the house, they said, for their own children, for their future. I was a burden, an obstacle to their plans. I felt the weight of their words like a physical blow, each syllable stripping away the illusion of family. By nightfall, they were gone, and I was alone, my suitcase at the door, the silence deafening. I didn't cry. Not then. Tears would come later, when the anger took root. That night, I sat in the dark, the house creaking around me like an old friend mourning with me. I thought of my life's 75 years of sacrifice, of pouring love into people who could discard me so easily. I thought of Clara, my only child, who had once been my world, now orchestrating my exile. I thought of Thomas, who had never called me mother, only Eleanor, as if I were a tenant in his life. And I thought of my grandchildren, Lily and James, who hadn't even come to say goodbye. The betrayal wasn't just Clara's or Thomas', it was theirs too. Their absence a silent agreement with their parents' choice. I could have crumbled, could have let the weight of it crush me. But something else stirred inside me, something sharp and unyielding. Revenge. Not the kind that spills blood, but the kind that rewrites the story, that takes back what was stolen. I would not go quietly to that nursing home. I would not let them erase me. The idea came to me in the small hours, when the moon hung low and the world felt like a secret only I knew. Years ago, Henry and I had stumbled upon a forgotten box in the attic, a relic from his grandfather's time. Inside were deeds, maps, and cryptic notes about a plot of land on the outskirts of town, a barren stretch no one had claimed in decades. Henry had laughed it off, saying it was worthless, but I kept the box, tucked away in the attic like a forgotten dream. I climbed the creaky stairs, my knees protesting, my heart pounding with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The box was still there, dust-covered but intact. I pored over the papers by lamplight, my fingers trembling as I deciphered the faded ink. The land was mine, legally, undeniably. And beneath the surface, according to Henry's grandfather's notes, was something no one in this town had ever suspected, a vein of rare minerals. Untouched. Waiting. By dawn, I had a plan. I would sell the land, not to some faceless corporation, but to a developer who had been sniffing around town for years, offering fortunes for the right parcel. I knew the man. Richard Hale. a sharp-eyed opportunist who'd once tried to charm me at a town meeting. He'd see the value in those minerals, and he'd pay dearly for it. I spent the morning making calls, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Richard was skeptical at first, but when I sent him the deeds and the geological notes, his tone changed. By noon, he was at my door, contract in hand, offering a sum that made my breath catch. It was enough to make me the richest woman in town, enough to change everything. I signed the papers, my hand steady, my heart a storm of grief and triumph. The money would be wired by morning. I didn't tell Clara or Thomas. I didn't tell anyone. I packed my suitcase not for the nursing home, but for a new life. I left behind the house, the memories, the family that had abandoned me. I left a note on the kitchen table. Simple and cold. You wanted me gone. I'm gone. Don't look for me. By the time they read it, I'd be far away, in a city where no one knew my name, where I could start over. The money was mine. The future was mine. And they would have nothing but the empty house they'd coveted. As I drove away, the town shrinking in my rearview mirror, I felt the first stirrings of something new, not forgiveness. Not yet, but the possibility of redemption, of a life rebuilt on my own terms. I was 75, and I was just beginning. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields of dying corn. I drove with the windows down, the wind pulling at my silver hair, as if it could unravel the years of pain knotted inside me. I'd chosen a small car, unassuming, bought with cash from a local dealer who didn't ask questions. It was the first purchase of my new life, a quiet declaration of independence. The radio played softly, some old ballad about love and loss, and I let it wash over me. Not because I wanted to feel, but because it drowned out the silence. I didn't know where I was going. Not exactly. I had a vague plan, a city a few hundred miles away, a place big enough to swallow me whole, where I could disappear into the crowd and become someone new. The money from the land sale was sitting in a new account, a number so large it felt unreal, like something from a dream I didn't deserve. But it was mine, and I would use it to carve out a life they couldn't touch. I thought about Clara as I drove. Her face kept flashing in my mind, her sharp cheekbones, her cold blue eyes, the way she'd looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. I remembered the day she was born, how small she'd been, how I'd held her and promised to give her the world. I'd spent my life trying to keep that promise, working long hours at the library, scrimping to pay for her college, swallowing my own dreams so she could have hers. And yet, here I was, cast out like an old coat she'd outgrown. The anger burned, but beneath it was something softer, more dangerous grief. I missed her, even now, even after everything. I missed the little girl who'd run to me when she was scared, who'd believed I could fix anything. I wondered if she'd ever miss me, or if she'd already rewritten our story, making me the villain so she could sleep at night. I stopped at a diner just before dusk, a faded place with neon signs flickering in the windows. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, called me Han and poured me coffee without asking. I sat in a booth, staring at the menu but seeing my grandchildren instead, Lily, with her wild curls and quick laugh, and James, quiet and thoughtful, always watching the world like he was trying to understand it. They were teenagers now, old enough to know what their parents had done, young enough to believe it didn't matter. I wondered if they'd argued with Clara, if they'd pleaded for me to stay, or if they'd just shrugged and moved on. The thought of their indifference hurt more than Clara's betrayal. I wanted to believe they'd cared, that they'd fought for me. But the silence in my phone, empty of calls, of text, told a different story. I left the diner with a full stomach and an emptier heart. Back on the road. The night closed in, the stars sharp and cold above me. I thought about the land I'd sold. That forgotten patch of earth that had turned my life upside down. Henry's grandfather had been a dreamer, always chasing schemes that never panned out. He'd died believing that land was his legacy, but no one had listened. Not even Henry. I'd kept the box out of sentiment, not hope, and yet it had saved me. It was justice. In a way, not the loud, vengeful kind, but the quiet sort that comes when the world rights itself without your asking. I wondered what Henry would think of me now, driving into the unknown with a fortune in my name. He'd always said I was stronger than I knew, but I'd never believed him until now. I reached the city just before midnight, its lights sprawling like a galaxy fallen to Earth. I checked into a hotel, a modest one despite my wealth, because I wasn't ready to embrace the extravagance yet. The room was small, clean, with a view of the city skyline. I stood at the window, my reflection faint against the glass, and felt the weight of my new reality. I was rich, richer than anyone in that small town could imagine, but the money didn't fill the hole where my family used to be. I lay on the bed, the journal from the attic beside me, its pages filled with Henry's grandfather's dreams and now. My own notisa list of things I wanted to do, places I wanted to see, a life I wanted to build. I fell asleep with the journal in my hands, dreaming of a future I could shape, one where I was enough. Morning came too soon, the city's hum pulling me from sleep. I woke with a start, the journal still clutched to my chest, its edges digging into my skin. For a moment, I forgot where I was, expecting the familiar creak of my old house, the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. But the sterile hotel room reminded May was gone, untethered, free in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I showered, dressed in the simple clothes I'd packed, and sat at the small desk with a cup of instant coffee. The city outside buzzed with life, but I felt like a ghost, invisible to the world below. I opened the journal and added a new entry, Day 1. Be someone new. It was a promise, a vow to myself that I wouldn't let their betrayal define me. I spent the day exploring the city, walking streets that felt alive in a way my small town never had. People rushed past, their faces a blur of purpose and distraction. I bought a new coat, deep blue and tailored, something I'd never have splurged on before. I ate lunch at a cafe, savoring the taste of fresh bread and the sound of conversations I wasn't part of. Everywhere I went, I carried the weight of my wealth, a secret that made me feel both powerful and vulnerable. I wasn't ready to spend it. Not yet. The money was a tool, not a comfort, and I needed to understand what I wanted before I let it shape me. By afternoon, I found myself in a park, sitting on a bench under a canopy of golden leaves. Children laughed nearby, their voices tugging at memories of Lily and James. I wondered what they were doing now, if they'd noticed I was gone, if they'd read my note. I imagined Clara finding it, her face crumpling as she realized I hadn't gone to the nursing home, that I'd slipped through her fingers. I wanted her to feel that loss, to know what it was like to be discarded. But the thought didn't bring the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, it left me hollow, yearning for a connection that might never be repaired. I took out my phone, tempted to call, to demand answers. But I stopped myself. They'd made their choice. Now I had to make mine. I returned to the hotel and spent the evening researching apartments, charities, investment opportunities. The money gave me options, but it also demanded decisions. I didn't want to just exist. I wanted to live, to build something meaningful. I found a listing for a small apartment downtown, modern but cozy, with a balcony overlooking the river. It felt like a place where I could start over, where I could be Eleanor Grayson, not the mother they'd abandoned, not the widow they'd pitted. I contacted the realtor, my voice steady as I arranged a viewing for the next day. It was a small step, but it felt like a leap. That night, I dreamed of Henry. He was young again, his hair dark, his smile wide. We were in our old garden, planting roses, his hands covered in dirt as he laughed at my clumsy attempts to dig. In the dream, I told him what had happened, how our daughter had turned against me, how I'd left it all behind. He didn't speak, just took my hand and squeezed it, his eyes full of the love I'd thought was lost forever. When I woke, my cheeks were wet, but I didn't feel alone. Henry was gone, but his strength lived in me, in the choices I was making, in the life I was building. I fell back asleep with a sense of purpose, knowing that tomorrow, I'd take another step toward redemption, not for them, but for me. The apartment was perfect. I stood on the balcony, the river glittering below, and felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. The realtor, a young woman with a bright smile, chattered about the building's amenities, but I barely listened. I was imagining mornings here, coffee in hand, the city waking around me. I signed the lease that day, paying a year up front, the kind of reckless decision I'd never made before. The money made it possible, but it was my will that made it real. I moved in the next day, my suitcase and a few new purchases all I needed for now. The apartment was a blank canvas, and I was ready to paint it with my own colors. I spent the next week settling in, buying furniture, books, a few plants to soften the edges of the space. I walked the city, learning its rhythms, its secrets. I found a bookstore with a reading nook, a market where vendors knew each other's names, a quiet corner cafe where I could sit and write in my journal. I wrote about everything: the betrayal, the sale, the new life I was building. I wrote letters I'd never sent, to Clara, to Lily, to James, pouring out my hurt, my love, my questions. It was cathartic, a way to release the pain without letting it consume me. I was learning to live with the wound, to let it scar over instead of bleed. One morning, as I sipped coffee on the balcony, my phone rang. It was Clara. My heart stopped, then raced, a mix of anger and longing surging through me. I let it ring, watching her name flash on the screen, each vibration a test of my resolve. When it stopped, a voicemail appeared. I played it, my hands shaking. Her voice was tight, strained, not the cold efficiency of that night at the kitchen table. She said they'd found my note, that they were worried, that they hadn't meant for things to go this far. She asked me to call, to come back, to talk. I listened to it 3 times, searching for sincerity, for regret. But all I heard was her need to absolve herself. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, only for the consequences she hadn't foreseen. I didn't call back. Instead, I went to the bookstore, bought a novel, and lost myself in its pages. But Clara's voice lingered, stirring doubts. Had I been too harsh? Had I misread their intentions? I thought of the nursing home, the packed suitcase, the way they'd left without looking back. No, I hadn't been wrong. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. Still, the call shifted something in me. Revenge had fueled my escape, but it wasn't enough to sustain me. I wanted more than their regret. I wanted a life that was mine, fully and fiercely. That evening, I made a decision. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp woman named Margaret who specialized in estate planning. I wanted to use my wealth for something bigger than myself. I told her about my idea foundation for women like me. Older, overlooked, abandoned by the people they'd loved. I wanted to fund homes, education, opportunities, to give them the chance I'd fought for. Margaret listened, her eyes kind but focused, and promised to draft the papers. As I left her office, I felt lighter, as if I'd taken the first step toward redemption not just for me, but for others who'd been cast aside. The city lights glowed brighter that night, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged among them. The foundation took shape faster than I'd expected. Margaret was a force, her efficiency cutting through bureaucracy like a knife. We named it the Grayson Fund, a nod to Henry, to the legacy we'd built together before it was torn apart. I poured half my fortune into it, keeping enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly. The money wasn't the point. It was the purpose it gave me. I worked with Margaret to outline program shelters for women escaping bad situations, scholarships for those wanting to learn, grants for small businesses. I met with architects, social workers, women who'd lived through their own betrayals. Their stories mirrored mine, and in their eyes, I saw the same fire that had driven me to leave. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. I started speaking at events, small gatherings at first, then larger ones. I told my story, not the details of the land or the money, but the truth of being abandoned, of finding strength in the ashes. People listened, their faces a mix of pity and admiration. I didn't want their pity, but I took their attention, using it to shine a light on the women the world ignored. I became a voice, a presence, someone who mattered. The irony wasn't lost on Mimi. Family had tried to erase me, and in doing so, they'd given me a platform. I wondered if Clara had seen the articles, the interviews, the photos of me speaking to crowds. I hoped it stung, just a little. One day, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, but a real letter, handwritten, delivered to the foundation's office. It was from Lily, my granddaughter. My heart lurched as I opened it, her familiar scrawl bringing back memories of birthday cards and school projects. She wrote that she was sorry, that she hadn't known what her parents were planning, that she'd cried when she found my note. She said she missed me, that she wanted to see me, to explain. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just a chance to talk. I read it again and again, my emotions a tangle of love and mistrust. I wanted to believe her, to believe that not all of my family had turned against me. But I couldn't forget the silence, the absence, the way they'd all let me go. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took the letter to the park, sat on my favorite bench, and let the words settle. Lily was 17, old enough to understand, young enough to be caught in her parents' choices. I remembered her laughter, her curiosity, the way she'd always asked me to tell her stories about her grandfather. I wanted to reach out, to rebuild that bridge, but I was afraid. What if she was like Clara, saying what I wanted to hear to ease her own guilt? I tucked the letter into my journal, promising myself I'd decide later. For now, I had work to do, lives to change, including my own. That night, I dreamed of the house again, but this time, it wasn't empty. Lily was there, sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red from crying. She reached for me, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. When I woke, my chest ached with a longing I couldn't shake. I knew then that redemption wasn't just about building a new life, it was about finding a way to forgive. Not for them, but for me. I wasn't ready yet, but the seed was planted, and I felt it growing, slow and stubborn, in the quiet corners of my heart. Months passed, and the Grayson Fund grew. We opened our first shelter, a warm, welcoming space where women could find safety and support. I visited often, talking with the residents, listening to their stories. They called me Miss Eleanor, their voices a mix of gratitude and respect. I felt like I was doing something real, something that mattered. The work filled the days, but the nights were still heavy with memories. I'd lie awake, thinking of Clara's voicemail, Lily's letter, the family I'd left behind. I hadn't responded to either, but their words lived in me, a constant pull between anger and longing. One evening, as I was leaving the shelter, I saw a familiar figure waiting across the street. It was James, my grandson, his lanky frame hunched against the cold. He was 18 now, taller than I remembered, his face a mix of Henry's features and something new, something his own. He saw me and hesitated, then crossed the street, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He didn't smile, didn't speak at first, just stood there, looking at me like he was trying to memorize my face. I wanted to be angry, to demand why he hadn't fought for me, but the vulnerability in his eyes stopped me. He said he'd been following the news, that he'd seen what I was doing. He said he was proud, but his voice broke, and I knew there was more. He told me everything: how Clara and Thomas had argued after I left, how Lily had refused to speak to them for weeks, how he'd felt caught in the middle, too afraid to take a side. He said he'd wanted to call, to come find me, but he didn't know how. He said he was sorry, and this time, I believed it. There was no calculation in his eyes, only regret. I invited him to the cafe across the street, and we talked for hours. About the past, about the present, about the family we'd both lost. He didn't ask me to come back, didn't ask for anything except my time. When we parted, he hugged me, and I felt the weight of years lift. Just a little. James's visit changed something in me. I started to see the cracks in my anger, the places where love could still grow. I wrote to Lily, a short letter, telling her I'd received hers, that I wasn't ready to meet, but that I loved her, always would. I sent it with a trembling hand, knowing it was a step towards something I couldn't yet name. I didn't write to Clara. Her betrayal was deeper, sharper, and I wasn't ready to face it. But James's presence, his honesty, gave me hope that not all was lost. That family could be rebuilt, piece by piece. I threw myself into the foundation with renewed energy, planning an expansion, a second shelter in another city. I spoke at a national conference, my voice strong, my story resonating with hundreds. I was no longer just Eleanor Grayson, the abandoned mother. I was a force, a woman who'd turned pain into purpose. But late at night, when the city quieted, I'd sit on my balcony and wonder if redemption meant letting them back in, or if it meant letting them go for good. The answer wasn't clear, but I was learning to live with the question, to let it guide me instead of break me. A year after I left, I returned to the town, not to stay, not to reconcile, but to see it one last time, to close the chapter I'd left open. The Grayson Fund was thriving, with shelters in 3 cities and plans for more. I'd become someone new, someone I liked, but the past still tugged at me, a thread I needed to cut or weave into something new. I drove through the familiar streets, the houses unchanged, the air heavy with memories. My old house looked smaller, its paint peeling, the garden overgrown. I didn't stop, didn't knock. I wasn't ready to face Clara or Thomas, but I needed to see the place where it all began, to remind myself why I'd left. I visited Henry's grave instead, a quiet spot under an oak tree. I sat on the grass, tracing his name on the stone, and told him everything of Betrayal, the land, the foundation, the new life I'd built. I told him about James, about Lily's letter, about the hope I was afraid to feel. I cried for the first time since that night, not out of anger, but out of love. For him, for the family we dreamed of, for the woman I was becoming. I left a rose on his grave, a promise to keep going, to honor the life we'd planned, even if it looked different now. As I walked back to my car, I saw Clara. She was across the street, unloading groceries, Her face older, wearier than I remembered. She didn't see me, and I didn't call out. I watched her for a moment, searching for the daughter I'd loved. But all I saw was the woman who'd chosen a house over her mother. I got in my car and drove away, my heart heavy but not broken. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I was ready to let go of the hate. It was enough. For now. Back in the city, I found a rhythm. The foundation grew, and so did I. I took painting classes, traveled to places I'd only read about, made friends who knew me as Eleanor, not as someone's mother or widow. James visited sometimes, and we'd talk about everything but the past. Lily wrote again, and this time, I invited her to visit. She came, nervous and hopeful, and we spent a day together, walking the city, sharing stories. She was different from Clara, softer, more open, and I saw in her the chance for something new. We didn't talk about her parents, but we didn't need to. We were building something of our own. Redemption, I learned, wasn't a single moment. It was a process, a series of choices to keep moving forward, to find meaning in the pain. I was still angry, still hurt, but I was also alive, more alive than I'd been in years. The money had given me freedom, but it was my choices that gave me purpose. I was Eleanor Grayson, and I was enough. 2 years later, the Grayson Fund was a national name, a beacon for women who'd been forgotten. I'd become a figurehead, not just a founder. My story a rallying cry for those seeking second chances. I spoke at galas, met with donors, shared meals with women who'd found refuge in our shelters. Their gratitude humbled me, but it was their strength that inspired me. I saw myself in them, in their refusal to be defined by their losses. I'd built a legacy, not of revenge, but of resilience, and it was more than I'd ever dreamed. Lily and James were part of my life now, their visits a quiet joy. We didn't talk about Clara or Thomas, but we didn't need to. They were my family, not because of blood, but because of the love we were rebuilding, careful and deliberate. Clara wrote to me once, a long letter full of apologies and explanations. I read it, felt the old ache, but didn't respond. Forgiveness was still out of reach, but I no longer needed it to move forward. I'd found my own peace. In the work, in the city, in the woman I'd become. One evening, as I stood on my balcony, watching the river reflect the city lights, I opened my journal. It was filled now, page after page of my journey from the night I was abandoned to the woman I was now. I wrote a final entry. I was abandoned at 75, but I didn't disappear. I became the richest woman in town, not just in wealth, but in purpose, in love, in life. I left them behind, but I carried myself forward. I closed the journal, my heart full, and looked out at the city. It was mine, not because I owned it, but because I claimed it, just as I claimed myself. I thought of the town, of the house, of the family that had tried to erase me. They were a chapter, not the whole story. I'd written a new one, with pages still left to fill. Redemption wasn't about them, it was about me, about the life I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal. I was 77 now, and I was just beginning. The wind carried the sound of the city, and I smiled, knowing I was home.